The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse, casting long, solemn shadows across the polished wooden floors. The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with murmurs from the gallery, a soft undercurrent of anticipation that only seemed to grow louder as the clock ticked closer to 10. On this particular morning, the courtroom was far from ordinary. Journalists had parked their cameras at carefully marked stations. Reporters shuffled notes nervously, and courthouse security officers whispered instructions to one another, their eyes scanning the rows of spectators. They were expecting something out of the ordinary, yet no one could have imagined the tiny figure seated at the center of the storm. 3-year-old Emma sat perched on her mother's lap, her small frame dwarfed by the heavy leather chair and the towering figure of her mother behind her. Her wide, dark eyes scanned the room with an unusual mix of curiosity and cautious interest. Clutched tightly in her hands was a soft, worn stuffed rabbit, its fur matted from countless nights of comfort and companionship. Emma had always been shy, a child of few words, and those who knew her often marveled at the quiet strength in her observant gaze. Today, however, that quietness was about to command the attention of everyone present in ways no one had anticipated. At the front of the courtroom stood Rex, a police dog of considerable renown. A German shepherd with sleek, chocolate-brown fur and piercing amber eyes. He was trained for narcotics detection, search and rescue operations, and courtroom demonstrations. His presence was imposing yet dignified. His ears flicked attentively as his handler whispered last-minute commands. Over the years, Rex had built a reputation for precision, reliability, and calm under pressure. But even Rex, with all his training and experience, had never faced the challenge of interacting with a 3-year-old like Emma in a formal courtroom setting. The judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Whitman, adjusted her glasses and surveyed the room. She had presided over countless unusual cases in her 20 years on the bench, from high-profile criminal trials to emotionally charged family hearings. Yet this morning, as she glanced at the tiny girl clutching a stuffed rabbit, she found herself uncertain how the session would unfold. Emma's presence was part of a demonstration intended to showcase Rex's abilities. But the optics were delicate. A toddler, a highly trained police dog, and a courtroom full of onlookers, a scenario ripe for unpredictability. Officers whispered among themselves, sharing speculation about how the interaction might go. "She's so small," one remarked, his voice low but audible to nearby colleagues. "Do you think she even speak?" Another shook his head. "I've seen her around the department before. She's quiet. Very quiet." The murmurings did little to settle the tension in the room. If anything, they amplified the audience's curiosity. Every person in that gallery leaned slightly forward, subconsciously bracing for a moment that could be either heartwarming, chaotic, or both. Emma's mother, sitting behind her, offered a gentle squeeze of reassurance. She had known for weeks that her daughter would be participating in this demonstration, but even she could not predict how Emma would react. The girl had rarely spoken in public, rarely initiated conversation, and rarely displayed the boldness that today's setting seemed to demand. Yet as her mother observed the way Emma's small fingers tightened around her rabbit, she sensed a quiet determination, a resolve that transcended her age. Something in Emma's demeanor suggested that she was ready to step into the spotlight in her own way. The court clerk called the session to order, and the judge's gavel tapped lightly against the wooden bench. "We are here today to observe a demonstration of Police K-9 Rex's capabilities," Judge Whitman announced, her voice steady and measured. "This demonstration will include controlled interactions with a civilian participant. In this case, that participant is Miss Emma Harris." The room shifted at the mention of her name. Cameras adjusted, pens paused, and heads turned. The weight of anticipation hung thickly in the air, as though everyone collectively held their breath. waiting to see how a 3-year-old would navigate an environment that normally intimidated grown adults. Emma's eyes met Rex's for the first time. The dog's stance was formal, yet there was an air of curiosity in his gaze. He sniffed the air, taking in the faint scent of baby lotion and cotton fabric, his movements precise but unassuming. To an untrained observer, the exchange might have seemed mundane, but those familiar with canine behavior recognized the subtle tension in his posture. Rex was assessing her. Just as much as she was about to observe him, he was evaluating her, his instincts telling him to remain cautious yet receptive. It was a silent dialogue, an unspoken negotiation of trust between child and animal. The judge allowed the room to settle before speaking again. "Miss Harris," she said gently, leaning forward slightly, "you may approach Rex if you feel comfortable. There is no pressure, simply observe, and if you wish, interact." Emma's mother leaned closer, whispering encouragement in her softest tones. The child's tiny hand trembled slightly as she released her rabbit, letting it rest on her lap. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the chair, her gaze locked on Rex's attentive eyes. Each step seemed deliberate, measured, a mixture of wonder, hesitation, and undeniable bravery. Observers in the room could not help but watch in awe. The juxtaposition was striking. The polished wood of the courtroom, the formal attire of attorneys, the gravitas of law officers, and amidst it all, a tiny, delicate child moving toward a powerful, disciplined police dog. There was a tension in the air that felt almost sacred. Even the journalists, typically jaded from covering high-stakes cases and sensational stories, leaned forward instinctively, sensing that they were about to witness something truly unique. Emma paused a few feet from Rex. The dog, trained to respond immediately to commands, instead waited. There was no barking, no lunging, no sudden movement, only the quiet, measured breathing of a highly trained canine and the soft intake of breath from a small child. The judge, leaning on the bench, studied the scene intently. She could see that this moment required patience, and she allowed the silence to stretch. Cameras captured the tension, the anticipation, the palpable weight of expectation in a room where history, in a small but profound way, seemed ready to be made. In that pause, no one spoke. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, officers adjusted their posture, and Emma's mother held her breath. The room, usually governed by rules and decorum, felt suspended in time, as though it had collectively recognized the significance of a child confronting the unknown with quiet courage. In the distance, the courthouse clock ticked steadily, a metronome for an unfolding scene that would soon ripple far beyond the walls of the room. Emma finally lifted her eyes from her rabbit, focusing entirely on Rex. The dog's ears twitched, his head tilting slightly, as if acknowledging the child's tentative courage. The judge cleared her throat softly, a subtle cue to let the moment unfold without interference. And for a brief, perfect instant, the courtroom was united in anticipation, united in silence, and united in the shared knowledge that something extraordinary was about to occur. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her tiny frame almost swallowed by the space between the judge's bench and the police dog's demonstration area. The air in the courtroom was dense with anticipation, as if every breath drawn by the spectators contributed to a shared tension. She gripped the stuffed rabbit she had reluctantly set aside, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady herself. Her dark eyes never left Rex, the trained German shepherd whose presence dominated the room, even without a sound. He sat perfectly still, ears perked, eyes following her movements with a precision only a disciplined canine could manage. The courtroom seemed unusually quiet, every whisper muted beneath the weight of curiosity. Observers couldn't look away from the child, whose calm yet deliberate posture suggested an understanding far beyond her years. Her mother, seated in the front row, offered a reassuring squeeze on Emma's shoulder, whispering, "You can do this." Just watch him first." Emma nodded slightly, but remained silent, her gaze locked on Rex. For a child so young, her ability to focus with such intensity was remarkable. This wasn't fear, it was preparation, a silent acknowledgement of the importance of what she was about to do. The officers in the courtroom exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and awe. One whispered under his breath, "I don't know if she's going to say anything, or if Rex will even respond." Another officer, a veteran of dozens of K-9 demonstrations, shook his head slightly. "Never seen a toddler like this," he murmured, adjusting the leash in his hand to give Rex a bit more slack. "Usually, kids either run away or freeze completely. But she's different." The murmured conversation spread, reaching reporters and spectators alike, creating a low, electric buzz of intrigue in the room. Emma's observation was meticulous. She noted Rex's posture, the subtle twitch of his ears, the controlled breathing of his powerful body. Her tiny head tilted slightly as she noticed the faint sheen of the dog's coat under the bright courtroom lights, the way his paws rested evenly on the floor, and the subtle tension in his hind legs as he prepared to respond to commands. To anyone else, these details might have seemed trivial, but for Emma, they were cues, tiny pieces of information guiding her next move. Even at 3, she understood that the moment required patience and respect. The judge, sensing the significance of the interaction, allowed a brief silence to linger. Cameras clicked softly in the background, capturing every heartbeat of the room. No one wanted to interrupt the delicate balance forming between child and dog. Emma's mother whispered again, offering encouragement without intrusion, understanding that her daughter needed to navigate this moment on her own terms. Emma's focus was absolute, her tiny body still and composed, as though she were aware that the world was holding its breath alongside her. Behind the scenes, the media crew leaned forward, adjusting their cameras to capture the perfect angle. The story unfolding was unlike anything they had seen before. A 3-year-old potentially bridging the gap between innocence and trained expertise in a high-stakes setting. Reporters scribbled notes frantically, knowing that if Emma acted, it would be a moment worth telling. Every eye in the room was locked on her, yet she seemed only to see Rex, ignoring the whispers, the camera lenses, and the silent judgment of a room full of adults. Rex's behavior was equally compelling. Despite years of training, the dog seemed almost to understand that this was a unique interaction. His muscles remained relaxed, yet alert. His head tilted slightly, ears twitching, as he followed Emma's subtle movements. The handler remained tense, but impressed. Recognizing that no command was necessary, Rex was reading the situation, assessing the child's intent with a precision that mirrored Emma's own careful observation. For a moment, human and animal were engaged in a silent dialogue, one that required neither words nor gestures, only trust and presence. Emma took a small step closer, her tiny feet making soft contact with the polished floor. She paused mid-step, noticing the way Rex's eyes followed her. There was no fear, only a measured curiosity. The spectators leaned forward, sensing that something remarkable was about to occur. The courtroom had become a stage for subtlety, where every movement, every glance, and every breath carried weight. Emma's confidence, though quiet, was palpable. She wasn't performing. She was engaging, observing, and preparing to communicate on her own terms. Her mother's soft whispers continued, barely audible above the hush of the room. "Just be gentle, sweetheart. You can do it." Emma's fingers brushed the edge of her rabbit's ear, a small gesture of comfort and grounding. She raised her head slightly, studying Rex's stance, noting the slight tension in his tail and the alertness in his gaze. Her mind worked in a way no one could have anticipated for a child her age. She was processing, analyzing, and preparing for the precise moment when words, tiny as they might be, would become meaningful. The gallery held its collective breath as the seconds stretched into minutes. Emma's quiet observation became a lesson in patience, focus, and empathy. Lawyers, judges, officers, and reporters alike felt the weight of the moment, realizing that this was not just a demonstration of a police dog's skills, but a testament to human connection and emotional intelligence, even in a child so small. Her gaze remained unwavering, a silent command that this was her time, and Rex's calm posture suggested mutual understanding. The room seemed suspended in anticipation, waiting for the moment when observation would transform into action. Finally, Emma leaned slightly forward, a subtle shift that drew the attention of everyone in the courtroom. Her small eyes locked on Rex's amber gaze, and the handler noticed a gentle, intuitive understanding in the interaction. No commands were given, no instructions shouted. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing the child and the dog to communicate in a way that transcended words. The courtroom felt alive, each heartbeat of the participants syncing with the silent rhythm of anticipation. Every observer sensed the extraordinary nature of the connection forming before them. Even the judge, typically unflappable, felt a small shiver of excitement. She adjusted her glasses and allowed the moment to linger, understanding that interference could ruin the delicate balance. The gallery of onlookers shifted slightly, each person straining to witness a possible miracle in miniature. Reporters instinctively stopped writing. Cameras were lowered for a better angle, and officers remained perfectly still, as if the entire room had collectively recognized that the moment required respect, silence, and attention. Emma's quiet observation had captured everyone, and anticipation now hung thick, like a tangible presence. Emma's tiny hands, once clutched tightly around her stuffed rabbit, relaxed slightly as she prepared for the first meaningful step. Her mind processed everything: the dog's posture, his calmness, the room's energy, and her own courage. It was a careful, deliberate observation, the kind that hinted at intelligence, empathy, and understanding far beyond her age. The room waited in hushed suspense, and for the first time, it became clear. This child was not just observing. She was preparing to connect. And when she did, the moment would be unforgettable. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Rex, the German Shepherd, shifted slightly on the polished floor. Trained to perfection, the dog's movements were precise, each muscle responding to invisible cues from his handler. Years of rigorous training had prepared him for countless situations. Detecting narcotics, participating in search operations, and even appearing in courtrooms to demonstrate his skills. But none of those moments had been quite like this. This was not a test of law enforcement protocols or procedural expertise. This was an uncharted interaction, a highly trained police dog facing the calm, watchful gaze of a 3-year-old child. Rex's handler, Officer Daniels, gave a subtle nod to signal the start of the demonstration. The dog responded with the fluidity and precision that had made him famous within the department. He moved through a series of predetermined commands, sitting, staying, responding to hand signals, and following verbal instructions. Each movement was executed flawlessly. Yet despite the controlled performance, his amber eyes never left Emma. There was an almost imperceptible curiosity in his gaze, as though he understood that the child in front of him was not just an observer, but an integral part of this demonstration. The spectators watched in awe, cameras clicking and reporters scribbling frantically. It was rare to witness the combination of discipline, intelligence, and calm displayed by a canine during a courtroom demonstration. Rex's posture was perfect, tail relaxed but alert, ears erect, muscles taut yet ready. The contrast between the child's small, tentative frame and the dog's commanding presence was striking. Emma's quiet observation had evolved into a delicate dance of focus and awareness. She had noticed subtle cues in Rex's movements, The gentle twitch of his ears, the shifting weight in his paws, the controlled breathing that indicated his readiness. Officer Daniels, aware of the room's tension, guided Rex through a series of additional exercises designed to display both obedience and skill. Rex navigated obstacles, retrieved objects, and followed commands seamlessly. All the while, Emma's eyes tracked every movement. She tilted her head, processing the dog's responses and mentally preparing for the moment when she would finally engage directly. Her mother held her breath, sensing the extraordinary concentration emanating from her daughter. Even seasoned officers were impressed by the child's attentiveness. Rarely had they seen someone, adult or child, read a canine's body language with such precision. The courtroom's energy was charged with anticipation. Whispers and small movements were kept to a minimum, as everyone understood that the interaction required patience. Even the judge, who had seen countless unusual cases, leaned slightly forward, intrigued by the silent communication forming between Emma and Rex. The room had transformed from a space of procedure and protocol into a stage of subtle connection, where the usual hierarchy of courtroom authority seemed secondary to the quiet, almost sacred exchange between child and dog. Emma took another small step forward, her tiny shoes making soft contact with the wooden floor. Her gaze remained fixed on Rex, unblinking, absorbing every detail. She had studied the way he reacted to each command, noted the patterns in his movement, and even subconsciously mirrored his body language. Though she did not fully understand the intricacies of canine training, her instinctive empathy allowed her to sense the dog's calmness, his readiness, and his attentiveness. It was a remarkable display of natural intuition, a reminder that observation, patience, and empathy could bridge even the largest gaps between species. Rex, for his part, remained perfectly poised. Officer Daniels maintained a careful hand on the leash, yet there was an unspoken trust between man and dog. The police dog's eyes followed Emma's every motion, his instincts guiding him to remain calm and receptive. No command was necessary for Rex to understand the significance of the moment. There was a mutual acknowledgement that this was more than a demonstration of obedience. It was a silent negotiation of trust. The child's quiet presence and the dog's disciplined patience created a space where the extraordinary could unfold naturally. As the demonstration continued, Emma's quiet confidence grew. She took another measured step closer, observing the slight shift in Rex's posture as he adjusted to her approach. Her mother, sensing the pivotal moment, whispered softly, "You're doing wonderfully, sweetheart. Just watch him, and when you're ready, speak." Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, her tiny lips pressed together in concentration. The room felt suspended in time, as if the collective focus of everyone present, reporters, officers, spectators, and the judge, was attuned to the small, deliberate movements of the child and the dog. The officers and courtroom staff, trained to maintain order and predictability, were captivated. Whispers passed among them, voices low but tinged with amazement. "Look at her focus. It's like she understands him," one remarked quietly. Another nodded, shaking his head. "I've trained Canine South for over a decade. I've never seen a child observe like this. She's different." The murmurs rippled through the room, but none dared to break the tension with noise or movement. They, like everyone else, recognized the significance of this unprecedented interaction. Emma's observation had become an act of silent courage. She had moved beyond simple curiosity. She was actively reading Rex's body language, interpreting subtle cues, and preparing for a response that would require her to step outside her comfort zone. The judge and attorneys watched intently, understanding that this demonstration was no longer just about law enforcement or the dog's skills. It was about connection, empathy, and the rare clarity of a child's perception. The quiet intensity in the room was almost palpable. Finally, After several minutes of careful observation, Emma crouched slightly, bringing herself to Rex's level without touching him. Her wide eyes met the dog's attentive gaze. She had internalized everything: the calm stance, the subtle breathing, the poised alertness of a trained animal. The courtroom seemed to collectively lean forward, sensing that a breakthrough moment was near. Even the media crew, used to capturing dramatic moments, paused as though recognizing the silent anticipation in the room. At that precise instant, Emma's small voice, barely above a whisper, trembled with clarity and intention. The child was ready to act, ready to bridge the gap between her tiny presence and Rex's commanding form. The courtroom, filled with adults accustomed to rules, procedures, and hierarchies, remained completely silent. Everyone instinctively understood that what was about to occur was not merely a demonstration. It was an unspoken testament to trust, empathy, and the profound intelligence of both child and dog. Emma's quiet observation had prepared her for the moment that would soon follow. Rex, patient and disciplined, waited, ears twitching slightly as he registered her intent. Officer Daniels maintained a careful hand on the leash, but sensed, as did the rest of the courtroom, that the extraordinary moment had arrived. The room was heavy with anticipation, yet it was not anxious, it was expectant, ready to witness a connection so simple in words, yet so profound in meaning. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Emma crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to Rex's level. The polished wooden floors reflected the bright morning light, but neither the gleam of the room nor the ticking of the large clock at the back could distract from the tension that had settled like a tangible presence. Every pair of eyes in the gallery was locked on the tiny girl, each person acutely aware that something rare and extraordinary was unfolding. The judge leaned forward slightly, her hands resting lightly on the bench, recognizing that her role was now more of a witness than a participant. Emma's tiny fingers, still brushing the edge of her beloved stuffed rabbit, twitched slightly, as if unconsciously mirroring the anticipation that coursed through the room. She had studied Rex intently, noting the subtle shifts in his weight, the careful positioning of his paws, the almost imperceptible flick of his ears as he followed her movements. It was a lesson in observation, patience, and preparation, qualities rarely seen in a child so young. Yet Emma's demeanor suggested a depth of understanding that went beyond the physical cues she could see. She seemed to sense the dog's calm, disciplined readiness, his awareness of the environment, and the collective attention of the courtroom. The officers watching from the sidelines exchanged quiet, astonished glances. "She's actually going to do it," one whispered. Another nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the tiny figure, recognizing that this interaction was far beyond a typical demonstration. It wasn't merely about Rex performing skills or following commands. This moment had become a delicate bridge between innocence and experience, between child and highly trained canine. It was a silent negotiation of trust, patience, and mutual respect. And every observer in the room felt the weight of it pressing gently against their consciousness. Rex's own posture reflected the gravity of the moment. The German Shepherd had been trained to respond to commands, to perform under pressure, and to remain calm in high-stress situations. Yet here he was, responding not to a verbal cue, not to a hand signal, but to the sheer presence of a small, silent observer. His amber eyes locked on Emma's, ears perked slightly, tail resting calmly but alert. Every muscle was poised and ready, yet relaxed in a way that suggested understanding. Officer Daniels' hand on the leash was steady, but his eyes betrayed a hint of astonishment. He, too, recognized the significance of the silent interaction forming before him. The gallery seemed to lean forward almost imperceptibly, as if gravity itself had shifted in anticipation. Reporters paused mid-note, cameras angled just so, capturing every heartbeat of the unfolding scene. Even those accustomed to dramatic courtroom moments found themselves caught in the quiet tension. The room, usually filled with the structured cadence of legal procedure, had been transformed into a stage of subtle human and animal interaction. Emma's quiet presence dominated, yet it was not intrusive. It was commanding in its own gentle way. Emma's mother whispered softly from her seat, careful not to break the fragile equilibrium. "Just watch him, darling. When you're ready, speak." The words, gentle and supportive, seemed to flow directly into the space between Emma and Rex. Her mother's calmness acted as an anchor, allowing the child to remain focused despite the weight of hundreds of curious eyes upon her. Emma nodded slightly, acknowledging the guidance without diverting her attention from the dog. Every muscle in her tiny body was taut with concentration, her mind processing what she had learned through silent observation over the past minutes. The judge observed closely, recognizing the delicate nature of the upcoming interaction. Every courtroom she had presided over demanded discipline, respect, and decorum, but this moment required something beyond the usual rules. It required patience, an understanding of subtle cues, and a recognition that the smallest actors, like a 3-year-old, could wield influence far beyond their size. The gavel rested silently on the bench, a reminder of authority, yet powerless to control the nuances of empathy, intuition, and trust that were now unfolding before her eyes. Emma's gaze remained locked on Rex, unblinking and deliberate. She noticed the slight tension in his hind legs, the measured rise and fall of his chest, and the way his eyes seemed to reflect a combination of curiosity and calm. Her mind, though young, absorbed every detail. She had already studied his responses during the initial demonstration, the subtle cues that indicated alertness, readiness, and compliance. Now she was preparing to act, but the moment required timing, sensitivity, and courage. She was not only observing, she was engaging in a silent dialogue, one that required patience and precision. The officers could barely contain their anticipation. Years of experience had taught them the importance of restraint, but even they felt the extraordinary nature of the interaction. A child's voice, simple yet meaningful, had the power to evoke responses that commands and instructions could not. The room's tension was palpable, a living entity that wrapped itself around the gallery, the judge, the officers, and even the dog. Every heartbeat, every subtle shift in posture, contributed to the growing expectation that the moment of connection was imminent. Emma's small hand, once tightly clutching her stuffed rabbit, relaxed slightly as she positioned herself more deliberately. She shifted her weight forward, bringing herself to an optimal line of sight with Rex's eyes. The dog's ears twitched again, his body responding instinctively to the unspoken intent emanating from the child. Officer Daniel's hand remained steady on the leash, yet there was a subtle relaxation in his stance, an acknowledgement that the extraordinary moment they had all been anticipating was about to arrive. The tension was no longer anxious. It had transformed into expectant awe. As Emma prepared, the courtroom became a study in contrasts, the polished floors reflecting light and focus, the solemn wooden benches filled with adults in suits, and in the midst of it all, a tiny, determined child poised to make a profound connection with a highly trained animal. Even the media crew, accustomed to high drama moments, paused to capture the silent intensity. The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes wide but steady, her presence a gentle acknowledgement of the significance of the unfolding moment. Finally, Emma's lips parted ever so slightly, a soft intake of breath signaling readiness. She had studied, observed, and absorbed everything about Rex's demeanor, and now she was prepared to communicate. Her voice, though small, carried the weight of intention, focus, and courage. The room, sensing the climax of anticipation, held perfectly still. Every observer, from the judge to the reporters, from the officers to the gallery, waited for the moment when quiet observation would transform into expression, a transformation that would, forever be remembered as the moment a child bridged the gap between innocence and trained discipline. Emma's body language conveyed confidence without arrogance, curiosity without fear. She was aware of the audience, but did not let it distract her. Her tiny hand reached instinctively toward the space just in front of Rex, maintaining the respectful distance taught by her mother. The dog, in turn, remained perfectly still, alert yet relaxed, embodying years of training while responding instinctively to the child's gentle presence. The entire courtroom, usually bound by rules and order, seemed suspended in anticipation, waiting for the moment when the first words would be spoken. The moment stretched, a slow, deliberate pause that seemed to extend into eternity. Every detail mattered: the flick of Rex's ears, the tilt of Emma's head, the subtle exhalation of breath that punctuated the silence. The anticipation was almost tangible, a living, breathing entity that wrapped around everyone present. Observers felt a mix of tension, awe, and excitement, understanding intuitively that this was not a moment to be hurried or interrupted. The scene had become a quiet testament to patience, empathy, and the extraordinary potential of human-animal connection. And in that silence, Emma readied herself, the culmination of every careful step, every quiet observation, every heartbeat of attention converging into a single instant. It was the moment before words, the pause pregnant with expectation, the fragile line between observation and communication, the delicate bridge between innocence and experience. And in the stillness of that courtroom, with hundreds of eyes fixed upon her, the smallest voice in the room prepared to make an impact that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The courtroom, already thick with anticipation, seemed to enter a new dimension of silence. Every observer, from the judge to the spectators, from officers to reporters, held their collective breath. Emma, poised and resolute, crouched slightly closer to Rex, her wide eyes locked on the dog's amber gaze. Her tiny chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, hands resting lightly on the polished wooden floor, still clutching the edge of her stuffed rabbit as though it grounded her courage. For all who watched, the moment seemed suspended outside of time, a delicate pause between thought and action. Then, without hesitation or faltering, Emma spoke. The words were small, almost a whisper, yet carried a clarity and warmth that filled the courtroom like sunlight, breaking through clouds. "Good boy." The effect was instantaneous. Rex's ears perked sharply, and his tail swished gently against the floor, a movement subtle, yet filled with recognition and calm responsiveness. For a moment, the room itself seemed to exhale collectively, releasing the tension that had built over minutes that felt like hours. A hush turned into murmurs of astonishment, soft exclamations, and gasps of disbelief. Those present were stunned not by the novelty of a child speaking, but by the profound simplicity and impact of two words, delivered with intention, empathy, and courage. The judge, who had maintained a composed and measured demeanor throughout, allowed a small, involuntary smile to cross her lips. She tapped her gavel lightly, more as acknowledgement than command, recognizing that decorum could wait in the face of such a remarkable moment. "Very well," she murmured softly, though her words were almost lost in the soft shuffling of amazed spectators. Every adult in the room felt a tug at their hearts, a reminder that power and influence sometimes came in the smallest and most unexpected forms. Reporters, who had been poised to document a simple demonstration of canine skills, now leaned forward, capturing the historic moment from every angle. Their cameras clicked softly, recording Emma's bravery and Rex's disciplined response. It was a moment that no one had anticipated, and one that would ripple far beyond the courthouse walls. For journalists, officers, and spectators alike, the scene was unforgettable. A tiny girl, timid and soft-spoken by nature, connecting instantly and meaningfully with a trained police dog. Emma's mother, seated nearby, felt tears prick at her eyes. She had witnessed her daughter's courage before, but never on such a public and profound scale. Her hand flew to her mouth instinctively, half in shock, half in pride. She said it, she whispered to herself, barely able to believe the scene unfolding. Emma, still crouched, glanced at her mother briefly, a small smile tugging at her lips, before returning her gaze to Rex. There was no fear in her expression, only calm certainty and a quiet joy that resonated deeply with everyone watching. Officer Daniels, Rex's handler, felt a lump in his throat as he watched the dog respond so naturally to the child's words. He had trained Rex for years, teaching him to respond to commands with precision and discipline, yet never had he seen such a seamless, instinctive response to something so pure and unforced. "Good boy," he muttered softly to Rex himself, acknowledging the beauty of the connection that had just occurred. It was a reminder that training and instinct, patience and empathy could coexist in moments of extraordinary significance. The room erupted quietly, not with chaos, but with measured astonishment. Spectators exchanged stunned glances, whispered their disbelief, and marveled at the simple elegance of what had just happened. Adults who were accustomed to structured procedures and strict rules felt a jolt of emotion, recognizing that the smallest voices could create the largest impact. 2 words, just 2 words, had altered the mood, the atmosphere, and the energy of an entire room. They had transformed a routine demonstration into a deeply human and profoundly emotional experience. Social media, though not yet widely aware, would soon be flooded with videos and photos capturing this unique interaction. The combination of innocence, courage, and the bond between child and animal created a narrative that resonated universally. Emma's moment became symbolic of trust, clarity, and the power of simple, intentional communication. Psychologists, educators, and child development experts would later cite this instance as a rare and inspiring example of a toddler, demonstrating empathy and understanding beyond her years. Even within the courtroom, the ripple effects were immediate. Officers began to nod appreciatively, recognizing that the bond between Emma and Rex highlighted aspects of human-animal interaction that often went unnoticed in high-pressure law enforcement environments. The attorneys, who had been preparing to showcase Rex's obedience, found themselves captivated by the emotional resonance of the moment instead. Every observer, regardless of professional role or personal experience, felt a sense of awe, a recognition that what they were witnessing was exceptional and unforgettable. Emma remained crouched, eyes bright and focused, her small frame emanating an aura of calm authority. She did not shout or gesture dramatically. She simply spoke, and the connection she forged was undeniable. Rex, for his part, remained attentive, responsive, and obedient, perfectly attuned to her presence. It was a silent testament to the power of understanding and patience. The room had been transformed from a sterile environment of protocol into a living, breathing demonstration of trust, communication, and empathy. The judge, now smiling openly, allowed a moment to pass before speaking. "Well," she said, her tone lighter than usual, "it seems that even the smallest voice can teach us the greatest lessons." Laughter rippled softly through the gallery, not mocking but joyful, a release of the tension that had built to this point. The words echoed in the minds of everyone present, lessons in patience, courage, and the simple power of acknowledging and appreciating another being. As Emma's mother lifted her daughter from the floor, the applause and murmurs of amazement continued to fill the room. Emma held her rabbit close once more, a small but triumphant smile curling her lips. She had not only observed and understood, but had participated meaningfully in a moment that transcended age, size, and expectation. The simplicity of "good boy" carried a resonance far beyond its brevity, leaving an indelible mark on every person in the courtroom, and eventually across the country. Even as the media began recording statements, and taking additional photographs, the emotional weight of the moment lingered. Emma's courage and Rex's disciplined response became a symbol of possibility, that even in structured, formal settings, genuine connection could be achieved through patience, observation, and empathy. The story, destined to go viral, reminded everyone that heroism is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, small, and delivered with a purity that commands attention effortlessly. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate courtroom. Officers discussed the interaction for weeks afterward, analyzing the child's composure and the dog's response. Psychologists praised Emma's emotional intelligence and ability to interpret cues from a trained animal. Families everywhere shared the story with children, emphasizing the courage of small acts and the significance of empathy. Emma's 2 words, so simple, so pure, would become a touchstone for discussions about bravery, human-animal bonds, and the extraordinary potential of even the tiniest voice. For a few magical minutes, the courtroom had ceased to be a place of rigid structure and authority. It had become a stage where a child and a dog communicated across the unspoken boundaries of training, expectation, and size. Good boy, spoken softly but meaningfully, had bridged worlds. It had demonstrated that observation, patience, and courage could create profound connections. It reminded all who were present, and all who would later witness the event, that the simplest gestures often hold the greatest power. And in that moment, the room understood fully. Emma, a 3-year-old girl, had commanded respect, inspired awe, and left a lasting impression, not through force, not through volume, but through the deliberate, tender power of 2 small words. A moment Emma whispered, "Good boy," and Rex responded. The courtroom transformed from a place of strict procedure to a living tableau of awe and wonder. Spectators, who had initially arrived expecting a routine police dog demonstration, now sat in stunned silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. Officers exchanged incredulous glances. Reporters quickly scrawled notes and adjusted camera angles. And even the judge allowed a moment for the sheer gravity of the event to sink in. The resonance of those 2 words, spoken by a tiny, determined child, filled the room with an energy that no legal argument, evidence, or precedent could replicate. Emma's mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, lifted her daughter into her lap. "You were amazing," she whispered, stroking Emma's hair softly. Emma pressed her stuffed rabbit to her chest, a small smile appearing on her face. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't performed, she had simply observed, understood, and connected. And that, more than anything, left an indelible mark on every adult present. The courtroom had witnessed not just a demonstration of a police dog's obedience, but the profound power of courage, empathy, and quiet determination. Officers who had trained with Rex for years were profoundly impacted. Sergeant Hill, a veteran with over 15 years of experience, shook his head slowly. "I've seen canine demonstrations hundreds of times," he said under his breath to a colleague, "but I've never seen a connection like that. She didn't command him. She communicated with him." The other officer nodded solemnly. "It's like she understood him on a level most adults can't even reach." That child has intuition, patience, and courage rolled into one tiny package. Across the room, other officers quietly echoed the sentiment, recognizing that Emma's interaction had elevated the ordinary demonstration to something extraordinary. The reporters present were equally captivated. Cameras and microphones captured the exact moment, freezing in time the quiet yet powerful exchange. Their pens moved frantically, scribbling descriptions, quotes, and impressions that would later form the backbone of a story that captivated the nation. Even seasoned journalists, used to covering high-stakes crime, politics, and sensational courtroom events, were in awe. The narrative wasn't about criminality, procedure, or controversy. It was about human connection, the pure courage of a 3-year-old, and the disciplined response of a highly trained police dog. The judge, maintaining her composed demeanor, but clearly moved, spoke softly to the room. This demonstrates that bravery and understanding are not measured by age or size. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most profound messages. Her words, though gentle, resonated throughout the courtroom, giving validation to the moment and allowing everyone present to process it in a reflective, almost reverential way. She allowed a brief pause before continuing the session, recognizing that interruptions would diminish the lingering impact of the interaction. Word of the event quickly spread beyond the courtroom. The police department, recognizing the extraordinary nature of the demonstration, shared the footage internally, and it immediately became a topic of admiration and discussion. Officers from other units watched the recording, expressing awe and respect for Emma's composure and Rex's responsiveness. Many remarked that it was a reminder of the softer, more human side of their work, often overlooked amidst the rigor, discipline, and seriousness of law enforcement duties. Psychologists and child development experts who later analyzed the footage were equally impressed. They highlighted Emma's ability to observe, interpret, and respond with empathy, noting that her interaction with Rex demonstrated emotional intelligence beyond her age. The precision of her observation, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her measured response were all indicators of innate courage and social awareness. Analysts cited her as an example of how children, even at a young age, could develop and demonstrate sophisticated interpersonal and emotional skills. Families and parents around the nation, upon seeing the story, were inspired. Social media quickly filled with messages celebrating Emma's bravery, her calm composure, and her empathy toward Rex. Parents shared the video with their children, emphasizing the importance of courage, observation, and kindness. Emma's moment became more than a courtroom anecdote. It became a symbol of inspiration, teaching that strength is not always loud, authority is not always formal, and connection can transcend age and species. In the courtroom, the ripple effect continued. Officers, attorneys, and reporters found themselves discussing the event long after the formal session ended. Conversations shifted from procedural matters to reflections on empathy, trust, and human-animal connection. Even hardened veterans of law enforcement admitted that witnessing a 3-year-old command the attention and respect of a highly trained police dog had been humbling. "It makes you rethink what bravery looks like," one officer remarked quietly. "It's not always about action. It's about awareness, patience, and respect." Emma, for her part, remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude of her impact. To her, it was simply a moment of connection. She had observed, understood, and spoken 2 words that bridged the gap between herself and Rex. She had faced an intimidating environment with focus and calm, and the results had been extraordinary. Her mother, filled with pride, gently carried her from the demonstration area, whispering praise while also marveling at her daughter's courage and clarity. Emma's small voice had left a huge impression, and everyone in the courtroom felt fortunate to have witnessed it. The media coverage of the event, which began in earnest the next day, was overwhelmingly positive. Headlines celebrated the child's bravery, her emotional intelligence, and the unusual but heartwarming interaction with Rex. Videos of the exchange went viral, capturing millions of views and sparking widespread discussion. Analysts, psychologists, and educators weighed in, praising Emma's composure and ability to engage meaningfully with a highly trained animal. The story became a touchstone for discussions about courage, empathy, and the profound potential of children to impact the world around them. Within the police department, the moment was commemorated as well. Rex's handlers received praise for allowing the interaction to unfold naturally, and Emma's bravery was recognized with small tokens of appreciation. Officers spoke of the event in hushed, reverent tones, recalling the precision, intuition, and mutual respect displayed in that brief but extraordinary interaction. They noted that moments like these reminded them why they did the work they did, because it was not only about enforcing rules, but about fostering understanding, trust, and connection. The ripple effects extended far beyond immediate reactions. Parents used the story as a teaching tool. Schools discussed it as an example of courage and empathy, and even psychologists referenced it in seminars about child development and emotional intelligence. Emma, unknowingly, had become a symbol of the extraordinary potential of ordinary children to impact the world through observation, patience, and simple, intentional communication. Two small words, "good boy," had created a cultural moment, one that reminded adults and children alike of the power of calm, confident kindness. The courtroom itself retained the memory of that day. Observers who returned months later often recalled the feeling of suspended time, the intensity of attention, and the quiet yet profound connection between child and dog. The judge reflected privately on the extraordinary lesson that had unfolded before her, recognizing that while legal expertise was important, moments of human connection carried a weight that could not be measured by statute or precedent. Emma had shown everyone present that courage, patience, and empathy were universal languages, accessible to all regardless of age. In the end, the reactions were unanimous. Emma's bravery and Rex's disciplined response had transformed a routine demonstration into a historic, inspirational moment. The courtroom had been witness not only to a child and a dog, but to the universal truths of trust, patience, and connection. Adults marveled at the lesson imparted by a 3-year-old. The story traveled beyond the courthouse into homes, schools, and offices, serving as a timeless reminder that even the smallest voice, spoken with intention and kindness, could leave an indelible mark on the world. In the days following the courtroom event, the story of Emma and Rex began to reverberate far beyond the polished wooden floors of the courthouse. Social media platforms were flooded with images and video clips of the tiny, 3-year-old girl speaking softly to the highly trained police dog. Hashtags like #GoodBoy, #Emma and Rex, and #TinyHero began trending, as viewers around the nation shared their amazement and admiration. But beyond the digital virality, the story became a living lesson in connection, courage, and empathy, reminders that the simplest gestures often carry the deepest meaning. Educators, psychologists, and child development specialists eagerly dissected the moment, using it as a case study for how children could understand, observe, and respond to the emotions and cues of those around them, even in situations far outside their comfort zones. Dr. Lydia Martinez, a child psychologist, remarked in an interview, "Emma displayed extraordinary emotional intelligence for her age. She observed, interpreted, and engaged with Rex in a way that many adults would struggle to replicate. It's a powerful demonstration of how observation and patience can create meaningful connections." Her words were shared widely in classrooms, parenting forums, and professional circles alike. Even within the law enforcement community, Emma's interaction became a topic of reflection and discussion. Officers, accustomed to rigor and discipline, saw in the exchange a reminder that trust, empathy, and human-animal bonds were essential components of effective policing. Sergeant Hill, a veteran officer, reflected, "We often focus on obedience, drills, and protocols. But that day, Emma reminded us that patience, observation, and understanding can be just as powerful as training. Even a child's intuition can guide a connection that no command can." These lessons resonated deeply, influencing the way officers approached both canine training and interactions with the public. The courthouse itself began to feel the lingering influence of that extraordinary day. Judges, clerks, and courtroom staff recounted the event with a sense of reverence, remembering the quiet hush that had fallen over the room and the almost tangible anticipation that had enveloped everyone. Judge Whitman, who had presided over the event, spoke in a later interview about the transformative power of witnessing such a moment firsthand. "I've overseen hundreds of cases," she said, "but few moments have left such a lasting impression." Emma's courage, patience, and empathy reminded all of us that connection is not about authority or experience. It's about presence, awareness, and intention. Parents and families across the country were similarly inspired. Many shared the story with their children as a demonstration of courage, focus, and emotional intelligence. Parents emphasized that bravery is not always about grand gestures or loud proclamations. It is often quiet, intentional, and rooted in understanding. Teachers incorporated the event into lessons on empathy, communication, and observation, showing that even the youngest among us could teach profound truths. Emma's story became more than a courtroom anecdote. It became a tool for guiding discussions about the importance of trust, patience, and the ability to read and respond to subtle cues in others. The ripple effects extended to animal behavior experts and canine trainers, who marveled at the natural connection between Emma and Rex. The dog's responsiveness to a child who had spoken no formal commands underscored the importance of intuition, calmness, and empathy in building bonds between humans and animals. Trainers emphasized that the interaction was a reminder that connection is not only about discipline or obedience, but about mutual respect and understanding. It highlighted the ways in which observation, patience, and presence could produce extraordinary results, even in highly controlled environments. Meanwhile, the media coverage amplified the story to a wider audience, blending human interest with a sense of inspiration. News outlets featured interviews with Emma's mother, the police officers involved, and child development experts, each providing insights into the unique dynamics of the interaction. Headlines celebrated the bravery and intuition of a tiny girl who had captivated a room full of adults and a highly trained dog with nothing more than her quiet observation and 2 words: "Good boy." For readers across the country, the story served as a reminder that courage and empathy can take many forms, and that impact is not always proportional to size or age. Emma herself remained blissfully unaware of the broader impact of her actions. To her, it had simply been a moment of connection, a small gesture that bridged the gap between curiosity and understanding. She had approached Rex with calmness, observed his behavior, and offered a phrase of affirmation. That simplicity, however, had resonated far beyond her intentions, inspiring adults and children alike. Her parents watched with pride, realizing that the qualities they had nurtured, patience, observation, empathy, had allowed their daughter to make an extraordinary impression on the world. Even within the police department, Emma's interaction led to reflections on how officers approached public demonstrations and community engagement. The event demonstrated that human and animal connections could be powerful teaching tools, illustrating the importance of calm, observation, and empathy in high-pressure situations. Officers began to consider how patience and understanding could enhance their interactions with the public, particularly with children. The story of Emma and Rex became part of internal discussions and training programs, highlighting that moments of connection can shape perceptions and inspire future generations. As the story continued to circulate, it also inspired conversations about courage in everyday life. Emma's bravery was celebrated not because she faced a dangerous threat, but because she faced uncertainty with calm observation and intentional action. Her actions showed that courage is often subtle, rooted in awareness and empathy rather than dramatic gestures. Teachers, parents, and child development specialists highlighted this lesson, emphasizing that every child, regardless of age or size, has the capacity to impact their surroundings through observation, patience, and kindness. Community organizations and educational institutions soon picked up the story, using it as a tool to teach empathy, emotional intelligence, and responsibility. Workshops, seminars, and classroom discussions featured Emma and Rex as case studies in how trust, respect, and observation can build profound connections. Children were encouraged to observe, think critically, and communicate with intention, while adults were reminded of the value of patience, presence, and listening. The narrative resonated because it transcended age, occupation, and background, offering lessons that were universally applicable. At its core, the story of Emma and Rex became a testament to the power of connection. It illustrated that observation, patience, and empathy could transcend barriers between age groups, species, and social expectations. Emma had shown that even the smallest voice, spoken with clarity and intention, could create ripples of inspiration that touched countless lives. Rex's calm responsiveness validated her courage, demonstrating that trust and understanding are often more powerful than commands or formal authority. In retrospect, the impact of Emma's moment in the courtroom became clear. It had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Parents, children, educators, law enforcement officers, psychologists, and animal behaviorists all drew lessons from her bravery. The story reminded the world that courage does not always roar, and that meaningful connection often arises from patience, empathy, and quiet observation. Emma had given a powerful demonstration of how even a 3-year-old could inspire profound reflection and change through a simple, intentional act. And so, the courtroom that day remained etched in the memories of all who witnessed it. Emma, a tiny figure with quiet determination, had bridged the gap between innocence and experience, child and dog, observer and participant. The lessons were clear, resonating long after the cameras were turned off and the gavel had fallen. Courage can be subtle. Connection can be instantaneous, and 2 words spoken with intention can leave an impact far greater than anyone could imagine. The courtroom had long emptied, yet the memory of that extraordinary day lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. Emma, a 3-year-old girl whose quiet courage had captured the attention of a highly trained police dog, had left a mark far beyond the polished floors of the courthouse. The story of her whispered words, "Good boy," and Rex's gentle, responsive reaction had spread nationwide, reaching families, educators, law enforcement officers, psychologists, and children alike. It became more than a moment. It became a symbol of connection, empathy, and courage that transcended age and circumstance. News outlets carried the story relentlessly, showcasing footage of Emma crouched beside Rex, her tiny eyes locked on the dog's amber gaze, her voice soft yet resonant. Headlines praised the child's bravery, her emotional intelligence, and the bond she had forged with a highly trained animal in a formal, high-pressure environment. Parents shared the video with their children. Teachers incorporated the story into classroom lessons, and psychologists discussed it in seminars as a rare example of a young child demonstrating both observation and empathy in a high-stakes situation. The reach of Emma's moment was extraordinary. The impact was particularly profound among educators. Teachers began to emphasize the power of observation and empathy in their classrooms, using Emma's story as a tangible example of how children could engage meaningfully with their surroundings. Even the youngest students can demonstrate profound understanding, explained Ms. Thompson, an elementary school teacher. Emma reminds us that patience, attention, and emotional intelligence are skills that should be nurtured from the earliest age. Her courage wasn't loud, it was deliberate, intentional, and inspiring. In schools across the country, children were encouraged to pay attention to the subtle cues in their environment, to observe and reflect before responding, and to understand the feelings and perspectives of others. Parents, too, drew lessons from the story. Emma's bravery became a tool for teaching children about the power of kindness, patience, and courage. Families discussed how words, even brief ones, could carry meaning beyond expectation when spoken with thoughtfulness and intent. She showed us that courage isn't just about facing danger, remarked one parent in an online forum. It's about being aware, observing carefully, and responding with empathy. That's a lesson for all of us, regardless of age. The story reinforced the notion that children, often underestimated for their small size, could wield influence through simple acts of understanding and care. Within the law enforcement community, the ripple effect continued. Officers reflected on the lessons learned from observing Emma and Rex's interaction. "We focus so much on training, obedience, and procedure," noted Sergeant Hill, but that day reminded us that connection, empathy, and awareness are equally important. The smallest participants can teach us some of the most profound lessons. The police department recognized the demonstration not just as a testament to canine training, but as an example of the power of mutual respect and trust, highlighting the human and emotional aspects of working with animals and the community. Psychologists and child development experts analyzed the footage and Emma's responses in depth, praising her ability to interpret cues, maintain composure under pressure, and act with empathy. They highlighted that the interaction was a rare example of emotional intelligence in early childhood, a demonstration that understanding, observation, and patience could produce profound, tangible outcomes. Many cited the story in discussions about the potential of children to inspire, teach, and affect those around them, emphasizing the importance of nurturing empathy and emotional awareness from a young age. Emma herself continued to grow in a nurturing environment that celebrated curiosity, courage, and observation. Her parents supported her interests, encouraging exploration and learning while maintaining a focus on empathy and kindness. Emma remained grounded and humble, never fully grasping the magnitude of her impact, but her actions continued to inspire others. Friends, family, and even strangers who learned of the story admired her quiet confidence and resilience, seeing in her a model of courage and the transformative power of observation. The media coverage eventually evolved into documentaries, educational features, and motivational stories, chronicling Emma's interaction with Rex and the broader lessons it offered. The footage was shown in classrooms, community events, and even law enforcement seminars, reinforcing the enduring message that courage, empathy, and connection could transcend traditional hierarchies and expectations. Experts highlighted the universality of the moment, noting that it spoke to audiences of all ages and backgrounds, emphasizing the timelessness of its lesson. Community organizations and child advocacy groups also took notice, using Emma's story as inspiration for programs aimed at teaching empathy, patience, and responsible interaction with animals. Workshops encouraged children to observe, interpret, and communicate with awareness, emphasizing that meaningful engagement could come from small, deliberate actions. Emma's moment became a case study in connecting with others, human or animal, through presence, attention, and kindness. The lessons extended far beyond the courthouse, leaving a lasting imprint on society. Even years later, the story retained its emotional resonance. As Emma grew, the anecdote of her whispered words to Rex continued to be cited as a powerful example of courage and emotional intelligence. People referred to it in conversations about leadership, empathy, and communication, marveling at how a tiny child had inspired a nation through a simple, intentional act. The courtroom that had once been filled with anticipation and tension became a historical reference point, a place where innocence and trained discipline intersected to teach a universal lesson about the power of understanding and connection. Emma's 2 words, spoken in calm confidence, transcended the specifics of the event. They reminded everyone that actions, no matter how small, could resonate far beyond their immediate context. "Good boy," became symbolic a phrase representing empathy, awareness, and the courage to act with integrity and kindness. It illustrated that even the youngest among us could teach profound lessons about communication, patience, and connection. The story spread through books, lectures, and social media, ensuring that the lesson would be passed on to future generations. The legacy of Emma and Rex continued to inspire law enforcement officers, educators, parents, and children alike. It demonstrated that courage is not always about boldness or volume, but often about patience, observation, and empathy. Emotional intelligence, once considered abstract, was now exemplified in a tangible moment that had touched the hearts of millions. The courtroom, once a stage of formal proceedings, had become the birthplace of a lasting lesson, one that would endure as long as people told the story of a tiny girl who had bridged the gap between innocence and discipline, fear and courage, child and animal. In the end, Emma's whispered words and Rex's calm response became a timeless example of what it means to connect, to understand, and to act with intention. It showed that even in highly structured formal environments, authentic interaction and empathy could create profound, lasting change. The story's enduring appeal lay not in the spectacle of the courtroom, nor in the obedience of a police dog, but in the quiet power of observation, the courage to speak, and the profound simplicity of two words that resonated across a nation. Emma had taught the world an unforgettable lesson, that even the smallest voices, when paired with awareness, courage, and empathy, could leave an impact far greater than anyone might imagine. And Rex, the disciplined, intelligent German Shepherd, remained a living reminder that trust and connection could transcend boundaries, creating a legacy of inspiration that would endure for generations.